So this video is a continuation of a previous video that I did, and if you have not watched it, I highly recommend that you do. You don't have to if you don't want to, but it is much appreciated if you do. So that will be linked below in the description if you want to watch it. So I watched Last Jedi in preparation for this video, so everything will be done chronologically as you see in the film. There is a lot in this film because a lot of it is very Ben-centric, even more so than The Force Awakens. So here are all the little scenes and hints that Ben redemption is coming. The first mention or scene that we have with Ben is the first scene in which Ben comes to Snoke's throne room. So Ben tells Snoke that he has given everything to the dark side, which is a very sad and just depressing statement, because he's tried his best to be completely a dark side user and it's failed him, and he's not really cut out for the job or cut out to be Snoke's apprentice. Ben underneath, he is just bruised and broken, kind of crying, most definitely was crying. Snoke then says that Ben has too much of his father's heart in him. That's a huge line. I don't know why people miss that, but that's like a huge line. If someone, that's a huge character trait to have your father's heart in you, especially if your father was Han Solo. So Ben then comes back and says that he had killed Han Solo and that when the time came, he didn't hesitate, which is a lie. But then Snoke says that it split his spirit to the bone, and it's very true. You can see it in his face. He's just conflicted left and right, just doesn't know what to do. We could really see Ben take all of this abuse from Snoke. But once he mentions Rey, Ben becomes very defensive. He wants to protect her honor, and he stands up to try and do it, and then Snoke electrocutes him. But then this is the most important ordeal in the entire scene. Snoke says, "Skywalker lives." When he says Skywalker, the camera goes to Ben as he's sitting up. That's literally the director giving you the answer that Skywalker still lives. That inside of Ben there is still the Skywalker lineage. Has not been tampered out. And then Snoke says the seed of the Jedi Order lives. Seed is a very interesting word to use, especially when you are talking about the legacy of something. So seed is used as like a product of something. What we're understanding here, that the Jedi Order was once something that Luke Skywalker brought back, and if Luke's apprentice was Ben, he would be the seed of the Jedi Order. That's really interesting to say when you're talking about your apprentice who's a dark side user, saying the seed of the Jedi Order lives. Then Snoke says hope lives, and Ben pops up into frame. Again, film language. The director is saying that Ben is the hope, which we get the confirmation later in this film. Then he destroys his mask in the elevator, which is very much like the destroyed mask of Vader in The Force Awakens. So what we're seeing here is that disintegration of the monster, which we see in Return of the Jedi whenever Anakin takes his mask off or when he's burning in the forest. This next scene is a really good case for Ben redemption. It's very good at using it for support. It is the scene with Ben and he's flying in his TIE silencer and he's blowing up resistance ships, and then he comes to the bridge where his mother's on. He's about to blow it up, but he senses his mother, and there's this scene between them, few moments that they feel each other through the Force, and Leia's theme plays and he hesitates. He doesn't blow up the bridge. One of the other TIE fighters do, but he doesn't, and that's important. He very much loves his mother. I think he absolutely does. And of course with the Snoke comic that came out, we do see that he still cares about his parents. Even when he was in Snoke's apprenticeship and he was becoming a dark side user, he still absolutely loved his parents. First Force Bond scene, we see Ben and Rey finally, they realize they can make a Force Bond. So it's very interesting to see their first reactions. They are both first at shock. Rey tries to, of course, try and kill him, but instead of being angry, he is trying to go after her and figure out what's going on. He says all this dialogue, can you see my surroundings? I can't see yours, just you. That entire conversation, he is more preoccupied about her than he is about the situation. But I think this relationship that develops throughout this movie will absolutely help redeem Ben. There's a reason why he takes a liking to Rey. There's a reason why he's not angry with her or trying to kill her, especially in The Force Awakens, which is crazy. And then in this movie, when he realizes he has a Force bond with her, there's just a lot going on between this relationship for it to be just a minor thing. And I think it will definitely support Ben being redeemed. I think she will be a part of the equation. And there's a lot of theories of how she will fit, in that whole redeeming storyline, and how she will help him or be a catalyst. There's a lot, and I would love to go into another video about that, but this is solely about Ben. And the next scene that there is a conversation about Ben, or a little line about Ben. Rey is meditating and then she goes straight to the dark. And Luke is absolutely perplexed on how she can go straight to the dark. And he says he saw this raw power once before and it was in Ben Solo. And so that really just, it's interesting because we see Rey, she could go straight to the dark and come back easily. She didn't like, it wasn't a hard thing for her like it was for Anakin or Luke. It was just a walk in the park. So if Rey can do that, then, and Luke saying that Ben can do that, maybe that's easy for Ben to come back to the light. Maybe that's something that can help him, like he has that ability like Rey does, so who knows. I think this is just an interesting little tidbit that we learn from Luke. So the second Force Bond scene comes along and Rey is still really mad, but Ben is still really curious and he's inquisitive about why this Force Bond is happening and why it's not like killing them or killing Rey. So I just think it's interesting that he is interested more about why it's connecting with Rey and why Rey is there than he is trying to kill her. There's like, throughout these Force Bond scenes, there's a lot of like Reylo information that supports that relationship, and it's really interesting. You could do like a whole entire thesis about it because I literally was just writing it down. I was like, oh yeah, I'm writing about Ben, not about the relationship, but the relationship does go, I think, hand in hand with Ben Dimson. So especially in the second Force Bond scene, he's very open. He's becoming vulnerable with her. When she says, it's too late, I found Skywalker, I win, you know, all that stuff, he has this look, and I noticed it. It's very pained, and it's almost like he's reopening a wound. And he asks, did he tell you about that night? The night I destroyed his temple, did he tell you about that? And he's very vague about, like, what he's trying to get her to ask, but it's also very evident. And he's trying to, like, not open a wound that'll make him just collapse and cry. Also a very telling sign of trauma. So this boy has been just knocked around and he just needs a rest. He needs a nap. But then Rey says, you're a monster, and he says, yes, I am. And I've actually heard from a podcast I was listening to, I didn't take this into account until I heard this podcast, but it is from What the Force. They had a guy come on who was a English teacher, I believe. He was also a husband, he had kids, but he was saying that this is very much kind of reminiscent of like a married couple getting into a fight, and one is calling the other out and the other one's like, yes, I did those things, but in a way of like that person wants them to still stay in the conversation and still fight with them so they can still be together and kind of like still talk it out type of thing. It was really interesting to hear. I'm going to link it down below. When Luke is talking to Rey in the temple, in the like the cave-esque temple thing, he said that a Jedi was in charge of the teaching and creation of Darth Vader. But then Rey says that there was also a Jedi who brought Vader to redemption. He could see that there was conflict in Vader and brought him back to the light. So it's probably foreshadowing of what will happen. Then he makes a line of Ben having that mighty Skywalker blood, and I think that's a huge hint. Of course, another Snoke said Skywalker lives, and the camera was on Ben, and then Luke said that Ben has that mighty Skywalker blood. I don't know what to tell you. So yeah, after you get that whole ordeal of like a Ben having that mighty Skywalker blood, that whole line that was said, Luke says that Leia entrusted her son with him. Leia thought that there was some dark in him. Leia entrusted Luke so that Ben could be more anchored into the light than the dark. And then Luke talks about his perspective of the night whenever Ben attacks him and then burns down his temple and takes his students and then kills the rest, which is Luke's perspective. And we can tell that he's also had some just trauma of that night as well, which we learn a little bit later. Then the third Force Bond scene, which is the iconic one. Actually, they're all iconic, but this one in particular, Ben says he didn't hate his father. So then we get some confirmation he actually really did love his parents, and then we see Ben's perspective on that night. So Ben's whole perspective is that Luke attacked him and he was defending himself, and that's it. And then straight after that scene, Rey goes to the hole that she keeps seeing, and it leads her down into a cave, much like Luke in Empire Strikes Back. And then right afterwards, she's recounting this thing, and we all think it's Luke, but she's actually talking to Ben. So Ben has become a little bit better in her eyes, and then Ben says, you're not alone. And she says, neither are you. Then Rey says it isn't too late, just like Han did in The Force Awakens whenever he was trying to get his son to come back to the light. Then we see Ben and Rey touch hands, and what's what's interesting is that Ben takes off his gloves specifically, and so he's unmasked. He touches her hands, and they both see they're like each other's future. And as they are touching hands, the Force theme plays. And of course Luke comes in, and Rey gets separated from the Force bond, and she interrogates Luke, asking him, did he try to kill Ben? And she says, did you create Kylo Ren? So already we're getting the separation of personas. So there is that persona. They need to chip that Kylo Ren persona away to get Ben Solo. Then Luke confesses, and he does actually give the right account of that night, or the somewhat right account. He sensed the darkness in Ben, and it was so much darkness he could ever conjure up in his mind. There was so much darkness. He thought that he could destroy it like he did with his father. Like, he had that split moment of that anger, and then Luke says it filled him with shame that he even thought of that he even wanted to do that. Then Luke says the last thing he saw were the eyes of a frightened boy whose master had failed him. And that also can be connected with Revenge of the Sith. That's the last thing that Obi-Wan saw whenever he was looking down at Anakin. And I think that's so poignant because of course Luke couldn't bring a redeemed Ben back. It's something else that has to. Just like Obi-Wan couldn't bring Anakin back, something else has to. Luke was the one who brought Anakin back, so who's going to be the one to bring Ben back? The story is cycling. I don't know. There's way too many hints in here for it not to happen. Then Rey says that she saw his future when they touched hands, and she saw that Ben Solo will turn. Then she offers Luke to come with her, but he says no, or he doesn't go with her, and she says, then Ben is our last hope. So again, Ben is being pointed as the last hope for this sequel trilogy. And then comes the elevator scene. Ben is with Rey. She calls him Ben, and that gets his attention. And then they both recount in a very vague way what they saw. She said that he will not bow to Snoke, he'll turn, and she wants to help him. And then he says what he saw, which she'll be the one to turn. And then Rey is brought to Snoke. Then Snoke says, it was I who breached your minds, which Ben does the same thing like he did earlier. Whenever he says something about Rey, he looks up very protective, but this was something that was secretive between him and Rey. But then he finds out that Snoke was the one who did it, and he feels like upset, like this was something that he wanted, and he is straight up angry at him. And then when Rey is being tortured by Snoke, Ben is very protective, and he's angry that Snoke is even like torturing her or touching her, so he's just like building up all this anger. And then Snoke says the line after the whole torture sequence. He says, I did not expect Skywalker to be so wise. When he says Skywalker, the camera is again on Ben. I don't know how many times, like how much proof of camera angles and like camera shots of Ben whenever Skywalker hope is being said goes to Ben. That alone should be some kind of redemption hint. So, and then Ben of course kills Snoke, which is very reminiscent of Return of the Jedi. Whenever Palpatine is killed by Darth Vader, Ben and Rey fight together against the Royal Guard. And then Ben's whole attitude after the fight, it's kind of like a rejection of everything Snoke did to him, and he's just like, I just want to like be better than what he tried to make me, and also spit on his grave as well. It was a whole mess of emotions he was going through. He wasn't really clear in his head. And then Ben wants Rey to join him, which is pretty much expected, and he wants them to rule together, and she just doesn't want to do it that way. She doesn't think that's the best way to rule together. The two get into a scuffle of trying to fight over the lightsaber, but it breaks in half. And if you remember in the last video, I said that the lightsaber could be a metaphor for Ben's heart in a way, or his soul. If you want to do it that way, that could be acceptable. And this scene really isn't about Ben. He's kind of off into like another area, but it could be applied to Ben. Rose tells Finn, that's how we're gonna win, not by fighting what we hate, but saving what we love. And I think that is a perfect sum up of this sequel trilogy, or the entire saga in general. I think this movie has such important lines within the Star Wars saga that really reflects the entirety of the Star Wars saga, but there is this one key line I think that will reflect the next movie coming up, is when Luke comes in and he meets with Leia first before facing down Ben, and Leia is just a little relieved to see her brother there and kind of sad as well, but she very somberly tells him that she's afraid that she lost Ben completely. And Luke just turns to her and says, no one's ever really gone. And not only does that say a lot about Ben's character, but it also says a lot about Luke's, where Luke has come back to being his fully fledged heroic self. And it also gives us a little bit of a sneak peek to what Ben will be like in the coming movie. But he's going to try and face down Luke, and what Luke's intentions are, he doesn't know, but he doesn't want to hear it. He just wants to get rid of that like he did with Snoke. So Ben's emotions in this whole fight isn't really his true emotions. It's just him trying to mask himself again. And like when he says that he'll destroy her, like he'll destroy Rey, Luke knows that he won't. It's just him trying to boost himself up and be like the bigger man. But he's all talk. He's not going to do it. So then Luke says, if you strike me down, I'll always be with you, just like your father. Luke sacrifices himself to try and save Ben, or at least help him into that direction. So in the last scene with Ben goes into the resistance base, or the rebel base, old rebel base. No one's there, but he kneels down and he picks up his father's dice, and then him and Rey have this last force bond. There's nothing said, but he looks absolutely destroyed, like he just went through a huge mountain of trauma and grief, and he's just broken. Rey knows that she can't heal him, she can't help heal him anymore. He's gonna want to have to go to her, so she's just waiting there, and she doesn't give him a look of like upset or anything. It's just like a look of I'll be here when you're ready kind of thing. That's all the Bendemption hints in The Last Jedi. Make sure you like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more videos, and follow me on my socials, which will be down below. And I'll see you guys later. Bye.